Will you stay this time? Those words. The smallest question from the smallest voice, and they stopped Sarah Hartwell cold in the middle of the grand ballroom of the Riverside Pavilion. She stood frozen, her champagne flute suspended at chest height, her practiced smile still fixed in place, even as something inside her cracked. Emma was asking if she would stay, not if she would come to the gala, not if she would pick her up afterward, but if she would actually stay. Be present. Pay attention to the girl standing beside her in a blue dress that had taken 45 minutes to choose that morning. Sarah wanted to say yes. She opened her mouth to say yes, but her phone buzzed in her clutch, and she knew without checking it that it was Marcus Chen, her VP of Operations, telling her that the Tokyo presentation had leaked to competitors. She knew her attention was being demanded elsewhere. She knew that what came next was always more important than what was right in front of her. So instead of saying yes, she said, "Of course, sweetheart, I'm here with you." Then she turned away to take the call. That was 8 months before everything changed. Sarah Hartwell had built Hartwell Communications from a garage startup to a billion-dollar corporation. At 42 years old, she was the youngest female CEO in the city's financial history. Profiled in Forbes 3 times, quoted in business magazines, invited to speak at Harvard about entrepreneurship and resilience. Her name meant something. Her word moved markets. Her decisions affected thousands of people. But her daughter barely recognized her. The success had come gradually, then all at once. There was the initial struggle, the 18-hour days, the business plans written on napkins, the moment when the first major client said yes, and everything became real. Then there was the expansion, the hiring, the team building. Then there was the IPO, the money, the power, the undeniable proof that all those sacrifices had been worth it. Except Sarah had stopped counting the sacrifices in terms of money and time. She had started counting them in terms of moments. The third-grade holiday concert she missed because of an emergency board meeting that wasn't actually an emergency. The birthday dinner she rescheduled because a potential investor needed her attention. The Saturday morning she promised to spend with Emma at the aquarium, but instead spent it at the office reviewing quarterly projections. By the time Emma was 7, Sarah had convinced herself that this was normal, that all successful women did this. That guilt was just the price of ambition. That if she worked hard enough and made enough money and provided enough resources, it would somehow balance out. It wouldn't. But Sarah didn't know that yet. What Sarah knew was that she was phenomenal at her job. She could read a boardroom better than most people could read a map. She understood what clients wanted before they articulated it. She had an instinct for strategy that had made her rich and powerful and terrifyingly lonely in a way she refused to acknowledge. The morning of the Riverside Gala, Sarah woke up at 5:47 a.m. and checked her email before her feet touched the floor. 53 new messages. One of them was from Douglas Finch, the managing partner of Stratos Capital, her company's largest potential investor. He was coming to the gala tonight. He was, according to the email, interested in discussing a major new initiative. Sarah's heart had raced. This could change everything. She didn't think about what everything being changed would cost. Emma was still asleep when Sarah went to her room before leaving for the office. She looked at her daughter's face, peaceful, in the early morning light, and felt that familiar twist in her chest. The one that felt almost like guilt, but that she had learned to reframe as motivation. I'm doing this for her, Sarah told herself. So she has a better life. So she never has to struggle the way I did. But Emma wasn't struggling financially. Emma was struggling with something else entirely. Something that all of Sarah's money and power couldn't fix. Emma Hartwell was 10 years old and had learned to make herself invisible. It wasn't a skill that appeared overnight. It was something she had cultivated slowly, like a plant growing in the shade, bending away from the light it couldn't quite reach. She had learned it in fragments, in moments, in the thousand small rejections that accumulate into something like acceptance. She remembered being 5 years old. She remembered music, not in the way most people remember music, as something heard, but as something felt. She would dance through the apartment and her mother would clap, and the world was big and bright and full of possibility. She remembered asking questions about everything. Why was the sky blue? Why did birds have wings but people didn't? Why did her mother laugh at some things and not others? She had been curious and fearless and certain that the world wanted to know her. Then came the fever. It was March and it was a Tuesday, and her mother was on a call with Tokyo. Emma remembered that because her mother had told her to drink water and go to bed. Just a quick sickness. Nothing serious. She'd get better soon. But Emma didn't get better soon. She got worse. The fever climbed. 103.7, 104.2. By the time her mother hung up the call and realized something was genuinely wrong, Emma was already in the ambulance, and by the time she woke up in the hospital, the fever had taken something that no medicine could give back. It took her hearing, but more than that, it took her way of being in the world. It rewired something fundamental about how she moved through space and connected to the people around her. It changed her from someone who could ask questions and expect answers to someone who had to watch people's mouths and hope she was reading their words correctly, and usually she wasn't. The doctors said she was lucky to survive. The word lucky appeared again and again, like a broken record. Lucky to be alive. Lucky to have parents who could afford the best care. Lucky, lucky, lucky. Emma didn't feel lucky. She felt erased. Her mother had moved into problem-solving mode immediately. She hired specialists. She researched schools. She took out a loan and got a second mortgage and poured money into therapy, into hearing aids, into everything that might possibly fix what had been broken. And Emma's mother did learn sign language. She practiced videos at midnight, her fingers clumsy and uncertain, her dedication admirable, but her understanding limited. But somewhere in the process of trying to fix her daughter, Sarah forgot to actually see her daughter. Not to see her as someone who needed fixing, but to see her as someone who was still exactly herself, just in a different way. By age 7, Emma had stopped trying so hard. The speech therapy had shown her she would never sound normal. The hearing aids whistled and shrieked and gave her headaches. And gradually, slowly, she had accepted the thing her mother couldn't accept, that she was deaf now, and that was okay, and that nothing would make her unhear, and that trying to make her undeaf was like trying to make a bird forget how to fly. She had watched her mother's face when various doctors explained this had seen the moment when hope died and was replaced with something like resignation. Emma had watched her mother grieve, not for Emma, but for the daughter she had lost. And Emma, sitting in those sterile offices, had learned something crucial. She was a disappointment, not because of what she had done, but because of what had been done to her. By age 9, she had stopped volunteering information. By age 10, she barely signed at all unless someone asked her directly. She went to school, did her homework, attended therapies, and moved through the world as quietly as possible. She had learned to want very little and expect even less. The morning of the Riverside Gala, Emma woke up and thought about not going. She could stay home. She could tell her mother she didn't feel well. But she didn't, because some part of her, some stubborn part that hadn't quite given up, still hoped that maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight, her mother would actually see her. She would be wrong. But she wouldn't stay wrong for long. The ballroom was chaos in slow motion. That was the only way Emma could describe it as she stood in the doorway, still holding her mother's hand. Everything was movement. but it was silent movement. Mouths opening and closing, hands gesturing, bodies swaying. All of it soundless, all of it a mystery. Chandeliers cast golden light across the space, and there were balloons tethered to chairs, and a string orchestra that was playing something bright and classical that Emma could feel in vibrations through the marble floor, but couldn't hear. Around her, the people of her mother's world moved in their familiar patterns. Men in suits, women in dresses, conversations flowing effortlessly between them, laughter that touched their faces and then disappeared into the air. Emma's mother squeezed her hand gently. Sarah's hand was cold. You could tell a lot about people by their hands, Emma had learned. Her mother's hands were always tense even when she was trying to relax them. "Remember, sweetheart?" her mother said, bending down slightly to make sure Emma could read her lips. "Just stay close, okay? We'll have fun." Emma nodded, because that was what you did when you were told you would have fun. You agreed ahead of time, even when you knew it was probably going to be boring and lonely and full of people who would look through you like you were made of glass. For the first 10 minutes, it was okay. Sarah held Emma's hand and walked through the ballroom, greeting people, introducing Emma to various colleagues and investors. Emma smiled on cue. She was very good at smiling on cue. But then, Margaret Chen from the board of directors appeared, and she had a question about the Tokyo initiative, and Sarah's entire posture changed. Emma watched her mother's attention shift, watched it move away from her like a light turning off. Sarah was still holding her hand, but her hand was empty now. "Just a moment, Emma," Sarah said. "I need to talk to Margaret." "You'll be okay for a few minutes, right?" Emma was always okay for a few minutes. She was okay for hours. She was so good at being okay that people sometimes forgot she wasn't okay at all. So Emma let go of her mother's hand and found a chair near one of the tall windows that looked out over the city. She sat down. She pulled out her phone. She opened the Candy Crush app that she had been playing for 3 weeks straight because it was one of the few things that made sense to her anymore. In Candy Crush, there were rules. There were clear objectives. There was a way to win. There was no confusion, no trying to read lips and getting it wrong, no smiling at people and hoping they would smile back. 8 minutes passed, then 15, then 30. Emma watched the other children. There was a girl in a white dress, maybe 6 years old, bouncing with the kind of unselfconscious joy that Emma remembered having once before she had learned that joy had to be earned and controlled and carefully monitored. The girl's mother was dancing with her, spinning her around, both of them laughing in a way that Emma could only see, not hear. Emma turned back to her phone. At 8:37 p.m., a boy who looked about 12 approached her. He was excited about something, his mouth moving rapidly, his hands gesturing. He was trying to include her in something Emma could tell from his body language, but she couldn't follow what he was saying. His words were moving too fast. His accent was too strong. Or maybe she was just too tired of trying to understand. She held up her phone and pointed to an app that explained she was deaf. She had gotten very good at doing this. It was a digital way of saying, "I'm sorry I'm broken," without actually having to sign it. The boy's face changed. The excitement drained out of it, replaced with something that looked like pity, or maybe just discomfort. He murmured something that might have been, "I'm sorry," and then he walked away. Emma was used to this. People walking away. People looking at her and then looking away. People trying for 5 seconds and then deciding she was too much trouble. But being used to it didn't make it hurt less. She glanced across the ballroom to find her mother. Sarah was laughing at something someone had said her head thrown back, her hand on some man's arm. She looked like someone having the time of her life. She looked like someone who had completely forgotten about the daughter she had brought to this event. Emma's eyes stung, but she didn't cry. She had learned that crying, even silently, brought attention. And attention brought questions. And questions brought conversations that she was too tired to have. Instead, she went back to Candy Crush. She made 3 moves. Then she looked up one more time to see if her mother had remembered her. She hadn't. At 8:47 p.m., Emma Hartwell made a decision. It was a small decision, barely conscious, but it was a decision nonetheless. She decided that hoping was too painful, that expecting things to change was too difficult, that it was better to just accept that her mother was never going to be the kind of parent who remembered her, and to stop wishing for something different. She decided in that moment to stop trying. If Emma had known that this decision would be the thing that finally forced her mother to pay attention, she might have smiled. But she didn't know. She just felt the heaviness of giving up, and she accepted it, because at least giving up was something she could control. James Mitchell had been coming to the Riverside Gala for 5 years. Not because he was particularly wealthy or socially connected, though he came from money and had been born into connection. He came because his nonprofit Hear Me See Me received a substantial grant from Hartwell Communications every year. He came because he believed in showing up, in being present at the places where decisions were made, where funding was allocated, where the future was being shaped. Most importantly, he came because he was looking for something specific. He was looking for a child who looked the way Marcus had looked just once before everything changed. James was 41 years old and had learned more from grief than most people learned from happiness. He had learned it in fragments, in small realizations, in the long, dark nights after losing his son. Grief had a way of clarifying things. It stripped away the false importance of quarterly projections and stock options and the endless climb toward more. It left only what mattered: time, presence, connection. Marcus had been 17 when the fever came, the same fever that had taken so many children's hearing. James had learned sign language in a matter of months, had become fluent, not because he had to, but because he wanted his son to know that the world James inhabited could accommodate his son's world, that they could meet in the middle. They had, and for 5 years, they had been closer than they had ever been. Marcus had taught James everything: how to see differently, how to move through the world with less noise and more attention, how to understand that a disability wasn't a tragedy, it was just a different way of being. Then a drunk driver had run a red light, and Marcus had pushed a younger student out of the way, and in the space of a single second, James's entire world had ended. That had been 3 years ago. James still had Marcus's hoodie. It was gray with white letters that read, "Hear Me See Me," which they had printed specially because Marcus wanted to support his father's work in the way that only a child can support their parent. James kept the hoodie in the back of his closet. Sometimes on particularly hard days, he would take it out and hold it against his chest and remember what it felt like to have someone need him. He couldn't bring Marcus back, but he could show other deaf children that someone saw them, that someone understood, that the world didn't have to be as lonely as it felt. That's why James came to these galas, even though galas made him deeply uncomfortable. That's why he volunteered. That's why he had learned to recognize the precise moment when a deaf child realized that the world around them had decided they were invisible. The moment he saw Emma, he recognized it immediately. She was maybe 10 years old, sitting alone near a window, scrolling through her phone, with the focused determination of someone trying not to cry. And James watched what happened next, with a clarity that came from experience. He watched Emma's mother across the ballroom dancing with colleagues, laughing with investors, completely unaware that her daughter was slowly disappearing. He watched Emma glance toward her mother. Once, twice, 3 times. Each time, hope rising and then being crushed again as her mother remained too busy to notice. James felt something break open in his chest. Not pain exactly, but recognition. Because he had lived this moment too, just not as a child. He had lived it as a father who had stayed late at the office one too many times. He had lived it as someone who thought that success was more important than presence, and who had learned too late that success without someone to share it with was just expensive loneliness. He set down his drink. He walked across the ballroom. He sat down beside Emma, and he did the one thing that no one else at that gala would think to do. He signed. His hands moved slowly, clearly, the movements natural and unself-conscious. Not the careful, deliberate movements of someone learning sign language from YouTube videos at midnight, but the natural grace of someone who had lived in sign language long enough to make it part of his muscle memory. He signed. "Hi. I'm James. What's your name?" Emma froze. For a moment she didn't react at all. It was like someone had paused the world, like time had stopped, like the universe was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Then slowly, Emma's hands moved. Her fingers shaped themselves into letters, into words, into a response that said, "Emma. My name is Emma." And in that moment something shifted. Not just for Emma, but for the entire evening. Because Emma had signed her name, and in signing it, she had stepped back into the world. She had chosen to participate. She had chosen to be seen. James smiled. Not a polite smile. Not the kind of smile that people give to children they pity. But a genuine smile filled with recognition. The smile of one person seeing another person fully, completely for who they actually are. "You know what James signed. That's a really good name. I'm glad we met." For the first time in 3 hours, Emma Hartwell didn't feel invisible. Sarah first noticed something was wrong when she saw her daughter's expression change. She was in the middle of a conversation with Douglas Finch. He was talking about market projections, about growth potential, about the kind of numbers that usually made Sarah's mind light up with possibility. But her attention kept fragmenting, kept drifting to the corner of the ballroom where she had left Emma 45 minutes ago. The glance was brief, a second, maybe 2. But in that second, Sarah saw her daughter's face, and she saw something that made her stop listening to Douglas Finch. Emma was smiling, not the small protective smile she gave to adults, but a real smile. A smile that reached her eyes, a smile that suggested she was actually happy. And she was smiling at a man Sarah didn't recognize. Sarah's words trailed off mid-sentence. "Are you okay?" Douglas asked. "Yes, I just..." "Give me one moment." Sarah excused herself and moved closer carefully, not wanting to interrupt whatever was happening. As she got closer, she began to understand what was happening. The man was signing. Not carefully, not slowly, not in the way Sarah had learned to sign, but naturally, fluidly, like sign language was as native to him as English was to Sarah. And Emma was signing back. Her hands were moving faster than Sarah had ever seen them move in a conversation with an adult. Her face was animated. She was leaning forward. She was engaged. Sarah felt something twist in her chest. It wasn't pain exactly, though it felt like pain. It was something more complicated. It was guilt. It was shame. It was the sudden crystalline understanding that she had been doing everything wrong. She had learned sign language so that she could communicate with her daughter. But she had never learned to connect. She had never learned to see Emma as someone complete and whole and capable. She had always seen her as something broken that needed fixing. And in trying to fix Emma, Sarah had broken something far more important, the connection between mother and daughter. This stranger, this man she had never met before, understood Emma in a way that Sarah didn't. He was seeing her daughter, actually seeing her. Sarah watched for another minute, long enough to see Emma laugh, not with sound, because Emma couldn't laugh with sound anymore, but with her whole body shaking, with her face glowing, with her entire being radiant with joy. Long enough to see her sign something that made the man laugh. Long enough to understand that this small, unremarkable moment in a corner of a ballroom was teaching her something she should have learned years ago. She wanted to interrupt. She wanted to go to her daughter and say, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I've been a terrible mother. I'm sorry I've been so focused on fixing you that I forgot to know you. I'm sorry I left you alone in a room full of people." But the words felt too big, too late, too heavy for this moment. Instead, Sarah turned away. She walked back to the bar. She made an excuse to Margaret about needing to take a call. She walked to the bathroom and locked the door. And she stood in front of the mirror, looking at her own face. Successful, controlled, powerful, utterly, completely alone. And for the first time in years, Sarah Hartwell let herself cry. James could see Sarah watching from across the ballroom. He knew the moment when she understood. He could see it in the way her body went rigid, in the way her hand touched her chest, in the way she turned away and disappeared into the crowd. He had seen that realization before. Not often, but sometimes. He had seen it on other parents' faces when they realized, suddenly and all at once, what they had been missing. It was a painful realization. It was also necessary. When Emma's energy began to flag slightly, when she started to glance toward the bathroom where her mother had disappeared, James made a decision. He didn't want to overstay his welcome. He didn't want Emma to associate him with the moment when her mother came back. This needed to be a conversation between mother and daughter. But before he left, he did something important. He looked directly at Emma, and he signed, "You know what, you're remarkable. I hope you know that." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, and James stood up. He didn't expect Sarah to approach him, but she did. He was getting water at the bar, trying to process the heaviness of the evening, when Sarah appeared beside him. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't extend her hand. She just said quietly, "I'm Victoria Hale. Lily is my daughter." James turned to look at her. He assessed her for a moment, not with judgment, but with the understanding that comes from living with grief. This was a woman who had just realized something devastating. This was a woman whose entire understanding of herself as a mother was crumbling. "I'm James Mitchell," he said. "She's remarkable." "How long have you known her?" Sarah asked. "About 45 minutes, James said. Sarah's face crumpled slightly. How did you know to sign, "I volunteer with a nonprofit for deaf and hard of hearing children," James said. "And I have personal experience." He said it simply, without elaboration. But Sarah understood. There was a story there. A loss. A journey. "She doesn't talk to people like that," Sarah said. "Not usually. Not unless—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. She talks to people who see her. James said quietly. "Most people don't. They see a deaf girl. They see a problem. They see someone to be fixed. But they don't actually see her. What your daughter needs isn't therapy or specialists. What she needs is to be seen, to be known, to be valued for who she is, and despite who she is." Sarah wanted to defend herself. She wanted to list all the things she had done, all the resources she had poured into Emma's care, all the ways she had tried to help. But the words caught in her throat. "I'm trying," she said finally. "I've always been trying. I know you have," James said, and his voice was kind, which was somehow worse than if he had been critical. But trying isn't the same as being present. You can't fix her into belonging, Sarah. She belongs if someone chooses to see her, if someone chooses to be there, if someone chooses her over everything else. Sarah stood there holding his words like stones in still water, watching the ripples spread outward, touching places she didn't want to be touched. "Is that what you did?" she asked. "Chose to see her?" James said, "For 45 minutes I chose to see her. It's not much, but it's more than most people offer." Emma came back then. She looked between Sarah and James, reading the tension in their faces. And she signed something to James, a question, a checking in. Not about herself, but about whether he was okay. And Sarah saw it. She actually saw it. The way her daughter was more concerned about another person's well-being than her own. The generosity that Emma had cultivated in silence, away from the world that refused to see her. The strength in that, the beauty in that. "I should go," James said to Emma. "But this was the best part of my night. Thank you for talking to me." He turned to Sarah. "Take care of her. She's worth caring for." "I know," Sarah said quietly. But as he walked away, she realized that knowing and doing were two very different things. The first week after the gala was the hardest. Sarah tried to return to her routine. She went to the office. She attended meetings. She made decisions. But everything felt different, hollow, like she was going through motions that no longer meant anything. On Tuesday night, she came home and found Emma doing homework. Instead of checking her email, instead of responding to the 17 messages waiting for her, instead of thinking about the Tokyo initiative or the next board meeting, Sarah sat down beside her daughter. "How was your day?" she asked. Emma signed her response. A long, complex story about a girl in her class, a misunderstanding, a resolution. And Sarah listened. Actually listened. Not while checking her phone, not while thinking about work, but actually fully present. When Emma finished, Sarah said, "I'm sorry I wasn't there at the gala. I mean, I was there, but I wasn't there. Not really. I should have been paying attention to you, not to everything else." Emma looked confused. Her mother was there at the gala. Sarah corrected, struggling to find the words. "I was there, but I wasn't present. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that it took a stranger to see you the way you deserve to be seen." Emma signed something that tightened Sarah's throat. "Mom, it's okay." Daniel was there, and Sarah felt something crack. Not break, but crack. A small opening. Because Emma had not only connected with James, Emma had felt safe enough to remember his name, to talk about him, to keep him present in her mind and heart, even after he had left. That night, Sarah made a call. She reached out to James through the nonprofit's website. She asked if he would be willing to come work with Emma a few hours a week. Maybe help her with sign language. Maybe teach her about deaf culture. Maybe just be the kind of adult who actually saw her. James called her back within an hour. Why, he asked. "Because she needs you," Sarah said. "She needs her mother." James replied. "I know," Sarah said, "and I'm trying to become someone worth that need." There was a long pause. "Okay," James said finally. "I'll help." Over the next month, James came to their home twice a week. He and Emma would talk for hours in the living room. He taught her about deaf culture with a capital D. He taught her the difference between being deaf and being deaf. He taught her about community. He taught her about pride instead of shame. And Sarah watched. She listened. She paid attention. But she also realized something crucial she couldn't change overnight. She couldn't suddenly become a different person. The work was harder than that. She started making small changes. She left work early on Fridays to be home with Emma. She declined a promotion that would have required even more hours. She told her board of directors that she was restructuring her schedule and that they would have to accommodate her family, not the other way around. Some of them didn't like it. They questioned her commitment. They suggested that maybe she wasn't cut out to be CEO if she was going to go soft because of her daughter. And Sarah made a choice. The kind of choice that changes your life. She said, "Then I'm going soft. Because a company isn't worth it if it costs me my daughter." She didn't quit. She didn't abandon her company. But she redefined what success meant. Instead of measuring it in revenue and power, she measured it in moments, in conversations with Emma, in the way her daughter's face looked when she laughed, in the presents she had finally learned to give. The board threatened to replace her. She offered them a compromise. She would stay as CEO, but with a restructured role. She would handle strategy and big-picture decisions, but daily operations would fall to her VP. She would work 4 days a week, and Fridays would belong to Emma. To her surprise, they agreed. Maybe they realized that a CEO who was actually present was better than a CEO who was constantly distracted. Maybe they understood that Sarah was now motivated by something deeper than profit. Either way, Sarah got what she needed. 3 months after the gala, Emma was visibly different. She was confident. She walked into a room without looking for approval first. She spoke up in class through an interpreter. She was designing her first real project, a logo for James's nonprofit, Hear Me, See Me. And Sarah watched her daughter work, and she realized something that she had been too busy to realize before. Emma was not someone who needed to be fixed. Emma was someone who needed to be known. And knowing her was the most fulfilling thing Sarah had ever done. The second annual Children's Charity Gala came exactly 1 year after the first. Sarah stood in the ballroom surveying the room. The same golden lights, the same champagne, the same powerful people in expensive clothes. But everything else was different. For the first time in 5 years, Sarah was present, fully present. She was still talking to investors. She was still networking. But she wasn't distracted. She wasn't performing. She was simply here. Emma stood beside her, not hiding in a corner, but integrated into the evening. She was 11 now, more confident, more herself. She wore a dress she had chosen herself, blue, the color of something she loved, something about frogs from the Natural History Museum, and the dreams she had about becoming a herpetologist or a graphic designer, or somehow both. Sarah had expected to feel anxious. Wasn't a CEO supposed to be disconnected? Wasn't strength supposed to look like invulnerability? But as she stood there, watching her daughter interact with the world on her own terms, Sarah realized that she had never felt more powerful in her life. A woman approached one of the board members who had questioned Sarah's decision to restructure her role a year ago. "How's the company doing?" the woman asked. It was a pointed question, a test. "Remarkably well," Sarah said. "We had our best quarter in 5 years." It was true. And Sarah sometimes wondered if it was because she was less distracted, more focused on what actually mattered, or if it was simply that she was happier, and happiness made her better at everything. "And Emma?" the woman asked, glancing at her. Sarah followed her gaze. Emma was mid-conversation with another deaf teenager, a boy who was signing to her with enthusiasm. She was laughing. "Emma is thriving," Sarah said simply. "You're not worried that people will see you as less strong, less committed to your work." Sarah thought about this. A year ago, she would have been terrified of that judgment. She would have made excuses. She would have tried to prove that she could do everything. Be everything, have it all, sacrifice nothing. But she had learned something in that year. I think Sarah said that people who can't be present with their own children are people who are secretly terrified. Terrified that their worth depends on being indispensable. And that's a weak position to run a company from. I'd rather be a woman who chooses people over power. And somehow I'm better at my job because of it. The woman didn't have an answer for that. she drifted away. Sarah saw James across the room. He had come to support the nonprofit as he did every year. When he saw Sarah and Emma together, he smiled. He made his way over, and Emma immediately lit up. She ran to him. Actually ran, abandoning the social convention of walking, and hugged him. James held her, his face soft. Sarah realized that this man who had lost so much had become an unexpected anchor for her daughter, and she was grateful. "Thank you," Sarah said when he came to stand beside her. For what James asked, for seeing her, for being willing to see her. James looked at Emma, who was now signing to him, telling him a story about something that had happened at school. "She wasn't hard to see," he said. "I just knew what to look for." "Not everyone does," Sarah said. "No?" James agreed. Not everyone is broken enough to understand that broken people can be the most whole versions of themselves, once someone sees them. Sarah realized he was talking about more than just Emma. He was talking about Marcus, about the way loss had taught him something that success had never taught her, that presence is the only currency that matters. "I want you to know something," Sarah said. "Emma has changed because of you. But I think you've changed too. I think this everything about tonight, about the foundation, about showing up, all of this, has become something different because you decided to be part of it." James smiled. "That's not me. That's you. You did the hard work. I just showed her that it was possible." Later that night, as Sarah drove Emma home from the gala, Emma fell asleep in the passenger seat. Sarah glanced over at her daughter, and she felt a profound sense of peace. She had not lost her company. She had not failed at her career. In fact, she had succeeded more than she ever had before. But she had learned that success meant something different now. It meant knowing that at the end of the day, the thing she had built that mattered most was not a company. It was a relationship with her daughter. It was a trust that had been broken and then slowly, painstakingly rebuilt. It was a presence that she had learned to give, a presence that was worth more than all the power in the world. And as Emma slept her head against the window, Sarah made a silent promise. She promised that she would never again choose a board meeting over a moment with her daughter. She promised that she would keep choosing presence, keep choosing Emma, keep choosing love for every day of their lives. She kept that promise. 6 months later, Emma won a full scholarship to a specialized high school for deaf and hard of hearing students. She was thriving, not because her mother had fixed her, but because her mother had finally learned to see her. Emma's logo for Hear Me, See Me was adopted by the entire organization. It appeared on every material, every email, every piece of their branding. Emma was hired as their official designer, and she would work with them throughout high school, building a portfolio that would eventually take her to a prestigious design school and a career that she loved. James's nonprofit tripled in size and impact, but more importantly, James had learned to take his grief and channel it into something that helped others. He kept Marcus's hoodie, but now it hung in his office as a reminder of why he did the work he did. Every child he helped, every family he supported, every moment of presence he advocated for it, was all in honor of the son who had taught him that time was the only thing that mattered. And Sarah. She remained CEO of Hartwell Communications, but she was a different kind of CEO. She was present. She was honest. She made decisions not just based on profit, but on purpose. She built a company that valued family and presence and real human connection. Sometimes late at night, she would think back to the first gala, to the moment when Emma had asked if she would stay, and Sarah had chosen to leave. And she would feel the weight of that choice, the cost of it, the years it had taken to repair the damage it had caused. But she would also think about the second gala, about walking into that ballroom with Emma beside her, about watching her daughter shine, about understanding finally that the greatest success a mother could achieve was raising a daughter who knew she was seen, who knew she was loved, who knew that her mother would choose her every single time. And that made everything worth it.